My name is Eliza Vance, and for most of my adult life, I believed that good work was its own reward. Not in a naive, greeting card sense, but in a deeper, more structural way. I thought that if you built something beautiful and strong, its integrity would speak for itself. If you solved the unsolvable problem, the solution itself would be your vindication. I grew up in a small town nestled in the Hudson Valley, a place where craftsmanship was still a currency. My father was a carpenter who could coax poetry from wood, and he taught me that the sturdiest things are built with quiet patience and an unwavering attention to detail. That philosophy became the bedrock of my career. For 9 years, I poured that belief into Meridian Solutions, a technology consulting firm headquartered in the steel and glass heart of Waverly. I joined when it was still a rising star, a place crackling with intellectual energy and ambition. I wasn't a coder or an engineer. My craft was communication. I built bridges between skeptical clients and brilliant, but socially awkward developers, between siloed departments, between conflicting global regulations. I spoke 3 languages, not just of nations, but of industries. I could translate the anxieties of a German manufacturing giant into a technical spec sheet and then translate that spec sheet back into a story of security and growth. I was the one they called when the delicate architecture of a deal began to tremble. I remember a frantic 2 a.m. call from our head of implementation. A major healthcare client in Zurich, on the verge of signing a landmark data migration contract worth $80 million, had discovered a potential vulnerability in our legacy encryption. Panic was rippling through the executive floor. Legal was drafting liability shields. The tech team was pointing fingers. Arthur Sterling, our CEO, had a voice tight with restrained fury when he got me on the line. "Fix it, Eliza," he'd said, as if I were a plumber being asked to patch a simple leak. I didn't sleep for 72 hours. I flew to Zurich, sat with their security auditors, and walked them through a custom-built contingency plan I'd drafted on the plane, one that not only patched the vulnerability but also created a more robust, multi-layered defense system. I didn't just sell them a solution. I listened to their fears, acknowledged their risks, and built a framework of trust where only suspicion had existed. We didn't just save the contract. We expanded it. There was no celebratory dinner, no company-wide email singing my praises. There was only a brief, perfunctory nod from Arthur in the next quarterly meeting and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. For years, that was enough. I told myself that the work was the reward. The promotion to Senior Vice President of Global Strategy, a role I had effectively been performing for 2 years, was always just around the corner. "It's in process," Arthur would say, his smile a thin, polished veneer. "We're just finalizing the new divisional structure." But the structure never seemed to finalize. Instead, the company culture began to shift. The vibrant, merit-based energy that had drawn me to Meridian was slowly being replaced by a more stagnant, political atmosphere. The best minds started leaving, replaced by safer, less imaginative hires who knew how to navigate the internal hierarchy better than they knew how to serve a client. The soul of the company was eroding, one quiet compromise at a time. The moment the foundation truly cracked for me came not in a boardroom, but through a half-open door. I was preparing for a board luncheon, arranging my presentation materials in a small, adjoining conference room. The main room was full of the company's directors, their voices a low, confident hum. The sliding door had been left ajar, and I overheard my own name. "Eliza Vance is a miracle worker, no doubt," one of them said, followed by a dry chuckle. "But she's intense. She walks into a room, and the air pressure changes. You can't build consensus with that kind of energy." Another voice, smoother and more calculating, chimed in. "She's a phenomenal closer. A scalpel. But you don't put a scalpel in charge of the whole hospital. She's not leadership material. She's an asset, a tool to be deployed." A tool to be deployed. The words hung in the air, clinical and dismissive. They didn't see me as a builder, a strategist, a leader. They saw me as a specialized instrument, something to be taken out of its case when needed and put away when the messy, important work of back-patting and credit-taking began. The promotion wasn't delayed because of restructuring. It was never going to happen because, in their eyes, I was too good at my job to be given a new one. My confidence had become a cage. I stood there, holding a portfolio that represented millions in revenue I had personally secured, and felt a profound, aching loneliness. The work, it turned out, was not enough. They didn't want a builder, they wanted a reflection of themselves. And in that moment, I realized my father's lesson was incomplete. It's not enough to build something strong. You also have to build it on ground that you own. Betrayal, I've learned, rarely announces itself with a thunderclap. It's more often a slow, seeping dampness that you ignore at first, a watermark spreading in a corner of your life until you can no longer pretend it's just a shadow. My watermark was named Isabel Sterling. Arthur's daughter arrived at Meridian with a freshly minted MBA and a title as vague as it was undeserved, Strategic Development Associate. She had her father's polished smile, but none of his cunning, and a profound lack of the one thing our business demanded: curiosity. She saw clients as line items and contracts as trophies, missing the intricate human tapestry that held it all together. The company, in its new sycophantic phase, treated her like a visiting royal. Her first major mistake was a catastrophic one. During a pilot program with a prestigious Vienna hospital network, Isabel, trying to demonstrate synergy, authorized a cross-platform data share without proper clearance. She inadvertently exposed the anonymized, but still sensitive records of over 200 patients to an unsecured third-party server. It was a digital grenade tossed into a room full of glass. The potential for a public scandal, for fines that would cripple our European expansion, was immense. The legal team went into a state of suspended animation. Marketing prepared for a media blackout. And Arthur called me. His voice, usually so controlled, was frayed at the edges. She didn't understand the protocols, Eliza. It was an honest mistake. You need to make this go away. Quietly. There was no talk of accountability, no discussion of her role. There was only the implicit command: protect the name, protect the bloodline, protect the company. And so I did. I flew to Vienna, met with the hospital's board, and spent 48 hours of intense, delicate negotiation. I didn't use corporate jargon or legal threats. I used the truth, a carefully curated version of it. I framed the incident as a controlled stress test of our security protocols, a test that had successfully identified a potential vulnerability, which we had now, thanks to their partnership, rectified. I took personal responsibility for the miscommunication that led to the test being conducted without their full prior knowledge. I absorbed their anger, validated their concerns, and slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt the bridge she had burned. I even managed to secure a follow-up contract to implement the new, more robust security system I'd designed in response. I never received a thank you, not from Arthur and certainly not from Isabel. I didn't expect one. I told myself it was an act of loyalty to Meridian, to the institution I had helped build. But loyalty is a two-way street, and I was driving alone in the dark. The true erosion began 3 days before my final trip. I was preparing the presentation for the Atlas Accord, the largest and most complex deal in Meridian's history. It was a symphony of moving parts, a partnership between 3 titans of industry in Vienna, Seoul, and Buenos Aires, all migrating to our cloud platform. I had spent nearly a year orchestrating it, building the relationships, designing the framework, nurturing it from a whisper of an idea into a $950 million reality. The presentation deck was my masterpiece, every slide a testament to months of meticulous work. I opened our shared drive to add the final financial projections. The file was there, just as I'd left it. But something was wrong. I clicked on the document properties. Last modified by Isabel Sterling. My heart gave a small, cold lurch. I clicked through the slides. The core was mine, my data, my strategy, my language. But she had made superficial changes. She'd rephrased a few bullet points with clumsy corporate buzzwords, changed the font on the headers, and swapped out a chart for a slightly flashier, less informative graphic. And in the bottom right corner of the title slide, where my name had been, it now read, prepared by Isabel Sterling, Strategic Development. She had erased me. Not with a bold stroke, but with the insidious click of a mouse, confident that no one would question it. She hadn't created anything. She had simply colonized my work. That night, I sat in my apartment, the lights of Waverly a-glittering in different tapestry outside my window. I stared at the presentation on my screen, the ghost of my labor staring back at me under someone else's name. A hot, bitter wave of anger rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I knew what would happen if I confronted her. She would feign innocence, call it a misunderstanding, a collaborative effort. Arthur would back her, and I would be labeled as territorial, difficult, not a team player. That word was always reserved for women who dared to claim their own space. So I did nothing. I packed my suitcase, confirmed my flights, and told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as the deal closed. But it did matter. The quiet theft of my work was more violating than any public slight. It wasn't a loud, dramatic betrayal. It was a slow, creeping erasure, a poison seeping into the foundations of everything I had built. I had saved her from her own incompetence, and in return, she was quietly, methodically, writing me out of my own story. Panic is a luxury I have never afforded myself. In the face of a collapsing negotiation or a looming crisis, my mind doesn't scatter, it focuses. It finds the next logical step, and the one after that. So when I saw Isabel's name on my work, when I felt the walls of Meridian closing in, I didn't shudder. I pivoted. The truth is, the lifeboat was already under construction. I had started building it 6 months earlier, not out of a premonition of betrayal, but from a growing understanding of the changing tides. Experience had taught me a hard lesson. A system built on politics respects power, not principle. And the only true power is independence. I called it the Salus Collective. It wasn't a company yet, not really. It was a concept, a legal framework, and a securely encrypted chat channel connecting a small group of us who had been quietly sidelined or pushed out of Meridian. There was Liam Chen, a systems architect of breathtaking genius, who had left after his most innovative projects were shelved in favor of more marketable, less ambitious ones. There was Ananya Sharma, a brilliant legal mind from our compliance department, who grew tired of watching the rules bend for the well-connected. We were the alumni of the old Meridian, the one that valued substance over style. Salus, from the Latin for sky, for the heavens, was our quiet rebellion. It was designed to be everything Meridian was no longer: agile, transparent, client-obsessed, and ruthlessly honest. We had no office, no funding, no website. We met in the quiet corners of coffee shops, in the evenings at my apartment, our plans taking shape over takeout containers and shared frustrations that slowly morphed into shared ambition. It wasn't a revenge project. It was a reclamation project. We were reclaiming the values that had been discarded. I kept it separate, firewalled from my life at Meridian. I was still bound by my contract, and I had every intention of honoring it. I wouldn't burn the bridge, but I would have a boat ready in case they decided to set it on fire first. The signal flare came during a long, late dinner in Buenos Aires. I was sitting across from Mateo Vargas, the charismatic and formidable CEO of an Argentinian logistics conglomerate, the third and final partner in the Atlas Accord. We had just concluded a grueling day of negotiations, and the air was thick with the scent of grilled steak and the exhaustion of high-stakes decisions. Mateo swirled the Malbec in his glass, his gaze direct and unervingly perceptive. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you do not carry yourself like an employee, Eliza. You carry yourself like an owner. You speak of this project as if you birthed it. So tell me, why are you not the one running the company you represent?" The question landed with the weight of a stone. I managed a small, deflective laugh. Because the man who is running it inherited it from his father. Mateo smiled, a brief, knowing curve of his lips. "Inheritance is not leadership," he said. "Some of us in this world prefer to invest in visionaries, not dynasties. If you ever decide you want to build on your own ground, you have my number. A partnership is only as strong as the people who uphold it." His words stayed with me on the flight back to Waverly. He saw it. The clients could see the disconnect, the gap between the person forging the path and the institution claiming the credit. They sensed the political rot, the hollowed-out core. They were betting on me, not on the logo on my business card. When I returned, I didn't tell Arthur about Mateo's offer. I didn't mention the back-channel emails I'd started receiving from the COO in Vienna or the feelers from the legal team in Seoul asking about alternative service models. But I did accelerate our work on Salus. Liam finalized the architecture for our secure client portal. Ananya drafted the modular legal agreements that would allow for swift, seamless transitions. We were no longer just building a lifeboat. We were building an ark. Meridian thought I was their closer, their scalpel, their tool. They had no idea I was quietly building a new hospital on my own ground, with a waiting list of their most important patients. If an outsider had walked into the grand ballroom of the Waverly Hotel that night, they would have seen a picture of corporate triumph. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables draped in gold linen. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Meridian had spared no expense for its annual growth gala, which was, in reality, a hastily rebranded coronation for Isabel Sterling. The promotion she had been handed was Vice President of Global Strategy. The very title I had been told for 2 years was in process. The irony was a bitter pill. I had built that division from nothing, back when it was just me, a suitcase, and a lonely battle to convince the world that Meridian had a global vision. I had paved that road with jet-lagged nights, cross-cultural finesse, and a fluency in the acronyms of a dozen industries. And now I was standing under a chandelier, holding a flute of champagne I couldn't bring myself to drink, forced to applaud the woman who was standing in the space I had carved out of the world. Isabel was luminous, of course, in a sleek emerald gown, her rehearsed speech peppered with all the right buzzwords: synergistic alignment, forward-leaning paradigms, agile scalability. She floated through the room, clinking glasses with board members while the company's PR team orbited her like anxious moons, capturing every practiced smile. "I am so humbled and honored," she said, raising her glass for the toast, "to step into this role and spearhead the incredible growth our company is poised for." My name was never mentioned. There was no nod to the Zurich miracle, no reference to the Atlas Accord I had single-handedly pieced together. Ananya, my silent co-conspirator from the Salus Collective, drifted past me, a wry, pained look in her eyes. "This is a masterclass in gaslighting," she murmured behind her champagne flute. It was worse than that. It was erasure. People I had mentored, colleagues I had championed, now offered me fleeting, apologetic glances before turning back to the center of power. They knew it was wrong, but their mortgages and ambitions were stronger than their convictions. Near the end of the evening, Arthur Sterling took the stage, his tailored suit and silver hair radiating an aura of unshakable authority. "We have watched Isabel blossom," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "And I can think of no one better to lead our most critical initiative to date, the global integration of our Atlas Accord partners." A wave of polite applause rippled through the room. My hands remained at my sides. Then, he turned his gaze slightly, and for a moment, it landed on me. "And to ensure a seamless transition," he added, "Isabel will be shadowing Eliza on her upcoming trip to finalize the details with our partners in Vienna, Seoul, and Buenos Aires." Shadowing me. The words were a public demotion, wrapped in the guise of mentorship. I was being asked to train my replacement, to hand over the keys to the kingdom I had built, to gracefully usher in the person who had plagiarized my work and stolen my title. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot coil tightening in my stomach. I wanted to smash my glass against the wall. I wanted to laugh until I cried. Instead, I inclined my head in a small, deliberate nod. I even managed to smile, the kind you learn in high-stakes negotiations, a mask of serene professionalism. The room applauded again, this time for my apparent graciousness, and the sound was like ground glass in my ears. I was being praised for my own capitulation. Isabel glided over to me, her smile a mix of triumph and condescension. "I'm so excited to learn from you, Eliza," she purred. "I'd love to get your download on the Buenos Aires framework before we fly out." Mateo Vargas sounds intense. "He is," I replied, my voice even and calm. "He values substance." "Oh, well," she giggled, a light, dismissive sound. "If he asks any tough questions, I'll just point him to you. You always have the answers." I met her gaze and held it. "Yes," I said softly. "I do." And in that moment, she had no idea that the answers I had were no longer for her or for Meridian. They didn't know that I had already booked a different flight, routed through a different city, on a timeline they couldn't track. They thought they were sending her to watch me. They had no idea I was going to disappear. The air in the cabin was stale with the scent of recycled oxygen and reheated coffee by the time we began our descent into Vienna. I had barely slept. The gala, the hollow congratulations, Isabel's patronizing request to be brought up to speed, it all replayed in my mind like a low-grade fever dream. But as the Austrian countryside emerged from the morning mist, a patchwork of deep green and sleeping villages, a sense of purpose settled over me, sharp and clear. This wasn't just a business trip anymore. It was a closing argument. 10 days, 3 continents, a $950 million deal hanging in the balance, and no room for a single misstep. The meeting in Vienna was in a stark, minimalist boardroom overlooking the Danube. The Austrian team, led by a severe, brilliant woman named Dr. Lena Richter, was all about precision. They didn't care about synergy or paradigms. They cared about data integrity and risk mitigation. "Your company's proposal is ambitious, Ms. Vance," Dr. Richter began, her words clipped and exact. "But your standard liability clauses are inadequate. They protect Meridian. They do not protect us." I had flagged this exact issue with Meridian's legal team a month ago. They had dismissed my concerns as overly cautious. Now, sitting across from the client, I didn't defend Meridian's position. I validated the client's. "You're right, doctor," I said, opening my briefcase. "They are inadequate." Which is why I took the liberty of drafting an alternative addendum. I slid a slim folder across the polished table. It contained a revised liability framework, one I had worked on with Ananya through Salus's secure channel. It was fair, balanced, and, most importantly, built on a foundation of mutual trust, not corporate self-preservation. Dr. Richter's eyebrows shot up. She read the first page, then the second, her expression shifting from skepticism to grudging respect. "This is not your company's standard language." "No," I said calmly. "It's the language that builds a partnership." She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze penetrating. "You are a very unusual representative for a company like Meridian." After the meeting, she walked me to the elevator. "Tell me," she said, her voice softer now. "If one were to desire this level of bespoke service consistently, and not just as a crisis response, where would one look?" "Perhaps," I replied, meeting her eyes, "one would need to look for a different kind of partner altogether." A silent understanding passed between us. The first seed was planted. In Seoul, the challenge was cultural. The Korean telecom giant was a deeply hierarchical organization, and our proposed agile, decentralized workflow was being met with polite but firm resistance. Isabel, who was supposed to have joined me, had her flight conveniently delayed by a phantom scheduling error I may have had a hand in orchestrating. I was on my own, and it was a blessing. Instead of pushing my agenda, I spent the first day listening. I met with their team leads, not just the executives. I drank bitter ginseng tea with their engineers and asked them to show me their processes. I found the friction point. They didn't fear the new technology. They feared a loss of the meticulous quality control that was a point of national pride. That night, in my hotel room, overlooking the glittering expanse of the city, I didn't sleep. I redesigned the entire implementation flowchart, integrating their rigorous stage-gate approval process into our agile framework. It was a hybrid model, a bridge between two worlds. When I presented it the next morning, the stony faces in the room softened. The CTO, a formidable man named Mr. Park, gave a rare, deep bow. "You have shown our way of working great respect," he said. "You have not come to dictate. You have come to build with us." Another seed, planted in the fertile ground of mutual respect. By the time I landed in Buenos Aires, I was running on fumes and a fierce, clarifying resolve. The meeting with Mateo Vargas was the final, critical piece. He was the heart of the Atlas Accord, the one whose trust was paramount. Isabel, predictably, was a no-show, her rescheduled flight now routed to the wrong continent entirely. Mateo didn't waste time with pleasantries. He grilled me for hours on financial models, currency fluctuation risks, and long-term scalability. He pushed, he challenged, he tested every assumption. I held my ground, my answers clear and direct, my data unassailable. Finally, he leaned back, the tension leaving his shoulders. He poured 2 glasses of water and pushed one toward me. "I trust you, Eliza," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "The person. But I do not trust the institution you work for. It has become bloated, political. I have seen it before. The visionaries build it, and the heirs run it into the ground." I met his gaze and didn't look away. "I understand your concern." "So," he said, leaning forward, his eyes locked on mine. "I will ask you again, the question from our dinner. Why do you follow when you were born to lead?" I took a slow breath, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the room. This was the moment. The door was open. "Perhaps," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I was just waiting for the right partners to lead with." Mateo Vargas smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Then you have found them. 3 cities, 3 meetings, 3 quiet promises made not to Meridian Solutions, but to Eliza Vance." I had carried the weight of a billion-dollar deal across the globe, but I wasn't just closing a deal for them. I was opening a new world for myself. The cabin lights had just dimmed for the transatlantic overnight flight when the world tilted on its axis. We were somewhere over the Atlantic, a tiny, pressurized capsule suspended in an endless, inky blackness. I was feeling a profound sense of weary triumph. The Atlas Accord was secured. The handshakes had been firm, the commitments solid. All that was left was to land and deliver the victory. I opened my company-issued laptop, intending to write a final, concise summary for Arthur. The screen flickered. A small, sterile box popped up. "Your connection to the Meridian server has been lost." I tried to log back in. "Access denied." I tried my email. "Your account cannot be found." Slack, the same. My digital existence at Meridian was vanishing in real time. Then, an email slipped through to my personal account, which I still had routed to my phone. The subject line was stark, brutal in its efficiency: termination of employment. The sender was Arthur Sterling. The body of the message was no more than 3 lines long. "Eliza, this email serves as official notification that your employment with Meridian Solutions is terminated, effective immediately. Your system access and all company credentials have been revoked. A representative from HR will contact you regarding the return of company property." No thank you. No explanation. Not even a pretense of professional courtesy. Just a digital guillotine, dropped while I was 35,000 feet in the air, utterly alone. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. I could feel the hum of the jet engines through the floor, a sound that had been my constant companion for years, now suddenly feeling alien and menacing. The flight attendant walked past, offering a warm towel, her smile oblivious to the fact that my entire professional life had just been incinerated. They hadn't even had the courage to do it to my face. They waited until I was isolated, unreachable, after I had delivered the single greatest achievement in the company's history. It wasn't just a firing. It was an act of profound disrespect. It was a statement. You are nothing to us. You were a tool, and we are done with you. A cold, quiet anger began to crystallize in my chest. It wasn't a hot, screaming rage. It was a glacial fury, slow-moving and immensely powerful. They thought this would break me. They thought that by cutting my access, they were cutting my power. They fired me as if I were just an employee, as if I hadn't woven the very fabric of the relationships they now claimed to own. They thought I had no leverage. They thought I had no backup. They were wrong. I took a long, slow breath, closing my eyes for just a moment. I thought of my father in his workshop, the scent of sawdust and patience. You build on ground that you own. I reached into my carry-on bag, under the travel pillows and spare chargers, and pulled out my other laptop. It was matte black, unbranded, its data encrypted and its existence unknown to Meridian. It was my own ground. I placed it on the tray table. It hummed to life, the screen glowing softly in the darkened cabin. The wallpaper was a simple, elegant logo, a stylized sea cradling a rising star. The logo for the Salus Collective. I opened a secure, offline folder. Everything was there. Every version of the Atlas Accord contracts, every financial model, every piece of correspondence, every meticulously documented promise I had made in Vienna, Seoul, and Buenos Aires. All legally and ethically mine, downloaded as part of the standard disaster recovery protocol for a deal of this magnitude, a protocol I myself had written years ago. Arthur hadn't just fired me. He had unshackled me. He had severed the last thread of a loyalty I no longer felt. They thought they had pushed me out of the plane without a parachute. They had no idea I had built my own wings. I opened a new, encrypted email client. I composed 3 simple, identical messages, one for Dr. Lena Richter, one for Mr. Park, one for Mateo Vargas. The subject line was a single word, continuity. The body was just 4. The ground is ready. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, leaned my head back against the seat, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt the quiet, unshakable certainty of standing on solid ground. Outside the window, the dawn was beginning to break, painting the horizon in pale, hopeful strokes of light. The taxi ride from the airport felt like a journey through a foreign city. The familiar skyline of Waverly, with the proud, sterile spire of the Meridian building at its center, seemed to belong to someone else's life. Nothing had changed, yet everything was different. It was 8:45 a.m. on a crisp autumn Monday when I stepped out onto the familiar granite plaza. The building I had walked into thousands of times now felt like a monument to a past I was rapidly leaving behind. The lobby was a hushed cathedral of marble and ambition. The security guard, a kind man named Marcus who always had a cheerful word for me, saw me approach, and his smile faltered. "Miss Vance," he said, his eyes darting nervously toward his supervisor. I wasn't expecting you. I just need to collect a few personal items, Marcus, I said, my voice gentle. I held my access card to the turnstile. The light flashed red. A flat, impersonal buzz echoed in the quiet lobby. Access denied. Marcus winced, a look of genuine apology on his face. I'm sorry. They deactivated it this morning. I nodded slowly. I had expected it, but the reality of it, being physically barred from a place where I had poured out my life's work, was a unique kind of sting. It was the digital firing made real. A junior HR representative, someone I didn't recognize, was dispatched to escort me. She carried a cardboard box. We rode the elevator up to the 32nd floor in a stiff, uncomfortable silence. The moment the doors opened, I felt it. A change in the atmosphere. The low hum of productivity was replaced by a tense, watchful quiet. Heads that would normally have looked up to greet me remained bowed over keyboards. My team, the people I had hired and mentored, looked everywhere but at me. I was no longer a leader, I was a contagion. My office, a glass-walled space with a view of the river, was already being stripped. The vibrant orchid a client had sent me from Singapore was gone. The framed photos of my family were gone. The small, carved wooden bird my father had made me, which had sat on my desk as a reminder of quiet craftsmanship, was gone. They had already packed my life into the sad little cardboard box the HR rep was holding. On the central table in the open plan area, a stack of the company's internal weekly newsletters sat waiting for distribution. I picked one up. The headline was a splash of corporate cheer, Isabel Sterling T.O. Helm Historic Atlas Accord. I scanned the article. It was a masterpiece of corporate revisionism, crediting Isabel's bold strategic vision and innate leadership for securing the deal. My name appeared once, in a single, dismissive sentence. Following the departure of Eliza Vance to pursue other opportunities, Ms. Sterling will assume full oversight of the project. Departure. Pursue other opportunities. The sterile, cowardly language of erasure. I folded the newsletter neatly and dropped it into a recycling bin. I didn't say a word. I took the box from the HR rep, my expression calm and unreadable. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed Arthur's office. He was on the phone, his back to the glass. For a fleeting second, he turned and our eyes met. There was no triumph in his expression, no smugness. There was only a flicker of something that looked like apprehension. He looked away first. Back on the street, the city air felt clean and sharp. The anonymous bustle of the crowd was a comfort. No one here knew or cared that I had just been rendered a ghost in my own professional life. I didn't go home. I walked 10 blocks to the Chamberlain, a quiet boutique hotel where I often stayed between international flights. They knew me. They didn't ask questions. In a calm, sunlit room on the 21st floor, overlooking the river from a different angle, I closed the door on my past. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cardboard box on the floor beside me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of it. Not the anger, but the grief. The grief for the company I had loved, for the work I had believed in, for the naive girl who thought integrity was its own shield. Then I let it go. I took out my laptop, my real laptop. I opened the Salus Collective secure portal. It was clean, elegant, and ready. Liam's architecture was flawless. Ananya's legal frameworks were embedded. 3 new messages were waiting for me, one from Vienna, one from Seoul, one from Buenos Aires. Each was a variation on the same theme. We are ready when you are. My hands were steady as I typed. The silence was over. It was time to begin. The silence that followed was not empty. It was tactical. It was the deep, held breath before a decisive move. From my temporary command center in the hotel suite, I orchestrated the quietest corporate coup in Waverly's history. Back at Meridian, the week began with an air of smug satisfaction. According to Ananya, who was feeding me discreet updates, Arthur Sterling had walked into the Monday executive meeting with a triumphant air, announcing the successful closing of the Atlas Accord. Isabel was lauded as the new face of the company's global ambition. They sent out the first round of official transition emails to the clients, outlining the next steps under Isabel's leadership. And then, nothing. The first tremor of unease hit on Tuesday morning. Dr. Richter's office in Vienna had not responded. Not with an acknowledgement, not with a query, nothing. By noon, Arthur had tried calling her directly. Her assistant informed him politely that Dr. Richter was in strategic planning sessions and was unavailable. By Wednesday, the silence from Seoul was just as profound. Mr. Park, a man known for his meticulous and prompt correspondence, was a digital ghost. An email from Isabel offering to circle back on the implementation workflows went unanswered. A follow-up from Arthur's office was met with a generic auto-reply. The real panic began on Thursday when Mateo Vargas in Buenos Aires finally responded. It wasn't to Arthur or Isabel. It was a one-line reply to a junior account manager who had sent a routine scheduling request. The email, which was immediately flagged and escalated, read simply, "Our point of contact is no longer with your company. We will not be proceeding with Meridian Solutions." The shockwave, Ananya said, was palpable. Arthur stormed through the 32nd floor, his voice, for the first time anyone could remember, losing its polished control. Isabel, faced with her first real crisis, without me to clean it up, locked herself in her office. They were operating in a vacuum, sending messages into a void that refused to echo back. They tried to leverage the contracts, but Ananya had already informed me of the key clause I myself had negotiated into all 3 agreements, a change in key personnel clause, allowing for a 90-day review and potential termination if the lead strategist, me, were to leave the project. They were trapped by a safeguard I had built to protect the clients, a safeguard that now protected me. They were being outmaneuvered not by noise and aggression, but by its polar opposite. Their power was derived from control, from communication, from being at the center of the conversation. I had simply, quietly, moved the conversation elsewhere. From my hotel room, I worked with a calm, focused intensity. The Salus Collective was no longer a concept. It was a living, breathing entity. Liam had the client portals online within hours. Ananya had the new service agreements drafted and delivered through secure channels. I held video calls with Vienna, Seoul, and Buenos Aires, not as a former Meridian employee, but as the founder and CEO of a new collective built on the very principles they had been searching for: trust, transparency, and a devotion to the work itself. We weren't poaching clients. We were welcoming partners who had already chosen to walk away. On Friday evening, Ananya called me. Her voice was a mixture of awe and amusement. "They're drafting a press release," she said, blaming unforeseen market shifts and a strategic realignment for the delay in the Atlas Accord. "They're trying to control the narrative." I looked out the window at the city lights twinkling below. They were still playing the old game, the one with smoke and mirrors. They didn't understand that the game had already been won. "Let them," I said softly. "They can have the narrative. We have the reality." This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. And the silence was the sound of the world quietly righting itself. At precisely 9 a.m. the following Monday, the story broke. It didn't come from a leak or an angry blog post. It came from a single, elegant press release, issued from a firm no one had ever heard of. Salus Collective, a new global strategy and technology firm, is pleased to announce the finalization of the Atlas Accord, a multi-year, $950 million partnership with industry leaders in Vienna, Seoul, and Buenos Aires. The accord will pioneer a new model for secure, cross-border cloud integration. Salus Collective is led by its founder and CEO, Eliza Vance. There was no mention of Meridian, no hint of the battle that had been fought in the silence. There was only a clean, powerful statement of fact. We didn't need to tear them down. We simply built something better, and our partners had followed. By 9:15 a.m., my phone, which had been silent for a week, began to light up. It wasn't Arthur. It was journalists from the Wall Street Journal, from Forbes, from the top tech industry publications. They all had the same questions. Who is Salus Collective? How did this happen? By 10:30 a.m., the first article went live, its headline a testament to the power of our quiet strategy, the $950 million deal that vanished from Meridian and reappeared overnight. Inside the glass tower of Meridian Solutions, the calculated silence had been replaced by pure, unadulterated chaos. Arthur Sterling, I was told, had seen the press release and had gone pale. He summoned his entire executive team for an emergency meeting. They tried to issue a counterstatement, something about tortious interference and breach of fiduciary duty, but their legal threats were hollow. We hadn't interfered. We had simply been there to catch the clients they had alienated. They had no legal ground, and they knew it. The most telling detail came from Ananya late that afternoon. Isabel Sterling had submitted her resignation, effective immediately, citing a desire to explore philanthropic endeavors. She couldn't handle the pressure. She had only ever known how to take credit for success. She had no idea how to navigate failure. I didn't feel a sense of victory, not in a triumphant, fist-pumping way. I felt a quiet, profound sense of rightness, of balance restored. I looked around my hotel room, which had become a cocoon of transformation. On the desk sat my laptop, open to the Salus Collective's new homepage, simple, clean, and honest. Beside it sat the small, carved wooden bird my father had made, which the hotel concierge had managed to retrieve for me from the box of my discarded things. My new life wasn't built on the ashes of my old one. It was built on the foundation of the one thing they could never take from me, the integrity of my work. The phone rang again. It was Mateo Vargas from Buenos Aires. "Eliza," he said, his voice warm with congratulations. "I see you have found your ground." I smiled, looking out at the endless sky beyond my window. "Yes," I said. "And the view from here is extraordinary."